Legacy lines, the battle for Valor Ridge. The day I got slapped with a $10,000 fine for excessive grass height was the same day I decided to convert my 20-acre spread on the Texas border into the most elite outdoor shooting range this side of the state line. The fine, as ridiculous as it was, came from the Homeowners Association of our polished little community lakeside ridge. But the real spark? That fine came with a signature from none other than our neighborhood dictator in designer heels, Meredith Langford, the HOA president. She lived just 800 feet away in a mansion that looked more like a vineyard estate than a Texas home. They didn't know I held a law degree. They didn't know I served nearly 2 decades in the Army Special Forces. They definitely didn't know this plot of land wasn't just dirt and mesquite trees. Might was the last piece of legacy my grandfather left behind before he passed. A legacy born from sweat, honor, and decades of service to this country. And no paper-pushing neighborhood bureaucrat was going to take it from me without a fight. The letter had arrived that morning crisp, cream-colored, embossed with the pretentious Lakeside Ridge HOA logo in. Every word was a slap in the face. Violation Code 14.3b. Landscaping standards, it read. Grass exceeds permitted height by 2.3 inches. Assessed penalty, $10,000. I read it twice. Then I crumpled it and tossed it onto a pile of previous notices warnings about my American flag not being properly displayed, about my '96 Chevy truck undermining the community aesthetic, and about my modest display of military memorabilia on my front porch being disturbing to neighborhood sensibilities. They wanted war, so I gave them one. That evening, around 7 p.m., I heard a knock. It was James' woolly neighbor from 2 lots over. Quiet guy, high school math teacher. Always polite, never stir the pot. He looked nervous. "Cal," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Got a minute?" I stepped aside and offered him a beer. He declined and sat quietly for a long moment before speaking. "They're targeting you," he said. At the last HOA meeting, after most folks left, I overheard Meredith saying, I quote, "We need to make it financially unbearable for Callahan until he sells." I stared at him, jaw tight. James looked ashamed. "They're not enforcing standards. They're clearing land." That night, I dug through county records. Turns out Meredith's husband, Preston Langford, owned a development company called Ridgeway Holdings. And guess what? They had already filed preliminary plans for a luxury resort and land that included mine. They weren't just annoyed by my flag or my truck. They wanted my soil. The next HOA meeting was the following evening. I hadn't gone to one in years. But this time, I polished my boots, wore my old Army service shirt, and walked in like I was back on a mission. Meredith sat at the head of the long boardroom table, platinum hair twisted into a tight bun, her smile sharp enough to cut steel. "Well, Mr. Callahan," she said with syrupy sweetness, "what a surprise. We were just discussing landscaping compliance." "I like to talk about that," I said calmly, "and the recent harassment disguised as code violations." Murmurs filled the room. I laid out photographs, dated records, satellite images. I built the case like a lawyer in closing arguments. And then I dropped the bomb. I also found Ridgeway Holdings development plans for a new resort. Coincidentally, it includes my land. Her smile shattered like thin glass. "That's in early stages," she snapped. "Irrelevant to HOA operations." "It's relevant when your violations are a means of forced acquisition," I said, voice level. Then came her true colors. "Your truck, your memorabilia, it's not the image our community promotes. And frankly, your background has raised concerns among residents." It hung there ugly and clear. She was trying to paint me as unstable because I was a veteran. "If you're implying that my military service makes me a threat," I said coldly, "you might want to rethink your words." The room went silent. Her mask slipped, and suddenly, she wasn't the community leader. She was just a bitter woman afraid of losing control. After the meeting, she approached me. "If you can't comply," she whispered, "we'll put a lien on your property." No one wants to live next to a man clinging to the past. I leaned in. "I don't cling to the past, Mrs. Langford. I honor it. And unlike you, I know the law." She blinked. Just once. but it was enough. The next day, I called Elena Sandoval, a brilliant property lawyer and my friend from college. She was tough, precise, and, as it turned out, had her own history with Ridgeway Holdings. They'd tried the same tactics on her parents' land a decade earlier. Time for payback, she said. Over the next few days, we found gold. The HOA had illegally redrawn boundaries to include more of my property. They hadn't filed the paperwork correctly. It was fraud. And worse, Meredith had embezzlement charges from 10 years ago that vanished after critical evidence disappeared. We prepared for war. I visited Sheriff Hank Buchanan, old friend of my grandfather. Careful, he warned. Meredith's the hammer, but Preston's the snake. He plays quiet and long. That night, I laid out every document, every map, and every violation. My land's rear 15 acres where they had no jurisdiction bordered their estate directly. Under Texas law, I could do a lot with that land. So I did. I called Ryan, an Army buddy turned range owner, and I filed paperwork for a new business, Valor Ridge Tactical Range. I advertised it as a veteran-run facility for firearm safety, law enforcement training, and veteran therapy. The land was zoned agricultural. No HOA reach. No city oversight. And definitely no Langford approval needed. Word spread like wildfire. 3 days later, Meredith came storming onto my land in heels, yelling, "You can't put a range here." "I can," I said, showing her the permit application. And I did. She turned beet red. At the emergency HOA meeting that night, she tried to spin the range as dangerous. I calmly presented safety data. James Wu stood up and reminded the group that Meredith's own late-night parties had violated noise rules for years. I watched her unravel. Preston showed up at my house the next morning, offering to clear the fines and buy my land at twice its value. "No thanks," I said. "It's not for sale." He leaned closer. "You can't win. I have friends at the county. Permit offices. Inspectors. I have something better," I replied. The truth. But they weren't done. Suddenly, road closures appeared on my property. Fake signs. Mysterious delays with the permit. A hit piece in the local paper with concerned residents all tied to Meredith. Elena wasn't rattled. She filed complaints, scheduled inspections, and dug deeper. Then she found it. The resort wasn't just a vanity project. Beneath my land sat a pristine aquifer. Water rights. And in drought-ridden Texas, water was gold. That's what they really wanted. We exposed Meredith's manipulation of HOA rules. Forged signatures. Falsified environmental reports. I took it to the people. We hosted a community meeting, invited everyone. Residents packed the high school auditorium. Elena showed them everything. The corruption, the lies, the greed. Then I played security footage of Meredith threatening me on my own porch. When James Wu stood up and described how she tried to get him fired for supporting me, Meredith finally lost control. "You think people like him belong in this neighborhood?" she shouted. The room turned on her instantly. She fled before the vote. That night, she was removed as HOA president. James was appointed interim chair of the Reform Committee. Preston stayed quiet too quiet. 2 weeks later, I caught Meredith and 2 hired goons trying to set fire to my new facility. I had them on camera. Sheriff Booker arrested them on the spot. Preston filed for divorce the next day. Her trial came months later. Elena presented the full case. The jury took 4 hours to deliver a guilty verdict: conspiracy, harassment, attempted arson. The judge imposed restitution and mandatory community service. And in a final poetic turn, her mansion seized to pay off debts was sold at auction to a nonprofit for veteran housing. Founded by me, the range opened on schedule. Families came. Veterans healed. And every Sunday morning, the sound of target fire echoed over the lake. Not in anger, not in vengeance, in freedom. Because sometimes the best way to silence a bully is to speak in a language they can't ignore. And in Texas, freedom speaks with clarity. And sometimes with a .308.